I'm Donald Pettitt, manager of the Canterbury Men's Centre, or I was up until now. It's 10 years down the track. This is an introductory video for part of the induction for somebody who's coming into the Men's Centre as a volunteer, a social worker, or a counsellor. Let's see, this is the history segment. So looking back on the Men's Centre over just under 10 years right now, this is February 2017. We started off as it came from a men's issues summit that was going to be run in 2006. It was coming down from Auckland, and I was part of the Men's Trust, a men's kind of psychodrome, men's group formation type of service that was running, all voluntary mostly. And I was chairman at that time, and the guys coming down from Auckland looked for some local quality talent of something that we could bring forward, and they asked for some ideas, and I suggested, well, why don't we talk about forming a men's centre in Canterbury? And I'd heard about one being formed up in Auckland that had been running, and it had closed probably a year or two before that, but I knew there were women's centres, and I thought, well, why not? I'd seen enough men with some issues that needed a hand, and so I spoke at that conference about that idea, and we had quite a bit of buy-in right from the beginning. A lot of people were saying, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and they helped suggest some premises for it and what we should do, and the framing and how it should be. We were considered whether trust or society, and we'd heard societies talk down because they're not as nimble as we needed to be. So we did get going in the end. There was Dennis Valentine, Paul Scott, and Ken Clearwater in the beginning, and I was one of the four, and I was surprised. You know, being a leader, I found myself eventually leading the Men's Centre, running the Men's Centre. I wasn't initially thinking that. I thought I was just helping it get going as a social worker. But yeah, I became the manager of the Men's Centre, had a son born at the same time, so I've had a beautiful process while I've watched him grow in relation to the Men's Centre, and the agency's changed over that 10-year period. We initially did things like, I spent the first year really having cups of tea with different people, talking to them about what should be there for men. Created a list of social service relevant to men. It was just a little flyer. And it went out, and it was very popular. It got a lot of distribution, and men started finding support services because of that. And support services started aligning with our vision of happy, healthy Canterbury men. Then went from that, I remember one big farmer coming in the door and talking to me about wanting to form a men's shed, and I'd heard about them. But this guy lived out, out of town, great big guy, said, I've got this farm, I've got these tools, I've got these skills, why can't I do this? And unfortunately, I said I knew about it, wanted it to happen, but he and I didn't get it going. But eventually, a range of centres around the city, first St. Albans, I got involved with them in Papanui School and forming one. And from that, it just pinged off from there. So I became a community development worker for about the next year or so, doing some direct care for men, doing some of the flyers, getting those out, still doing a lot of cups of tea, but also doing the development of men's sheds. 10 years later, most of them really didn't get going until after the earthquake 5.5 years ago. And now they're rolling. There's about 28 groups that have all formed, mostly since that time. And it's been a wonderful thing to be part of. And once again, we just add that little extra bit. Sometimes they needed somebody to help them out, do a funding application, or find a person to help them with this, or help them find a shed, or just chair a meeting. And they really just took it over themselves. A lot of men getting active. Ray Hall, I'll mention, he's been really an important part of that whole process, and he's currently the chairman now of the National Men's Shed Association, as well as the regional coordinator for Canterbury, and based out of New Brighton. Let's see, the next phase was we started developing something like I got into health for a while, into the health silos. I was on the Partnership Health Board, which eventually became the Pegasus Health PHO aspects of their service, primary health, education, and so on. That's separate from the GP type based services that they have. So I was on their board and advocating for the care of men. That was a time when we took an active, I took an active role in pressing for a support service called Appetite for Life. It was a fairly large service at the time, seeing somewhere like 500 to 1,000 women a year, but helped them get their diet and lifestyle into shape, 6 weeks of free tender care. And guys were excluded because. And it took me a little while to really warm up to that and step into the role of being an advocate. I started writing letters to people and getting letters of support and challenging the CDHB. Eventually, a man I knew took on a human rights complaint against them, and because I'd been aware that I didn't know for the first 2 years of the advocacy work we could do that. So he took it up and made the application and challenged and sent a shock through the system with that. Then I took a complaint, and here I was sitting on one of the health boards, the PHO, and at the same time I was taking them a human rights complaint. So it was quite an interesting position to be in for the board. The board was highly receptive to it, but I wasn't on the CDHB board. So eventually that did open up and start including men, and I understand that there's a minority population that are using it that are men, but still men are allowed to do it, and they're benefiting from it. So that was interesting to become an advocacy role inside of an agency as a social worker. Then the earthquake hit, and we lost our office in the center of town, which was at Community House, Christchurch Community House, and it took me about 5 months before we started finding our purpose again. We fortunately had a lot of our own information in the cloud and did a few reprints, and there were lots of people giving support to people like my service, the Men's Center, but it was just me and Simon Guernsey at the time. He was doing our admin funding, but he left after the earthquake eventually too, so it's just me there. And I managed to launch the Blokes book, which hopefully you'll still see around in circulation, which has currently gone through 6 print runs, 5 editions I think, and I'm the CDHB, Sue Burgess and the crew over at Community Public Health really got behind it and made it easy for me, encouraged me to get this money from the Ministry of Social Development, and they paid towards creating it and printing it, and I got that at the door. I had 4 pallets of Blokes books sitting in my garage at home because I was still working from home, and I just put it out to our newsletter list. We had a fairly comprehensive one by then of people that were interested in what we were doing, and they were gone in about a month. That people just came to my house and got boxes and boxes and boxes of these things and distributed them to their men, and hopefully their belief and their efforts paid off in the sense of it would have been really useful to a lot of men in earthquake recovery. We continued to do this. The next step from that was we got into the direct services for men. I realized we could get social work students involved to help us out, and counseling students started approaching us because they needed venues, and before we knew it, we had 4 counseling students, and I would supervise those, do some intake work with a client, send them on to the counselors, and then we realized we can charge for this. So we're currently, I think, our 5th year, maybe even 6th year of developing the counseling service, and it's become very sizable, probably increasing in size about 30% a year over that period. We're probably leveling off now, but we're seeing about 85 or so men a month right now. This is the quiet time of year as well, but probably by the end of the year we'll be well over 100, ideally more like 130, but we try and do that. From there we've rolled on and done the Fun for Older Men booklet, which has had some positive effect as well. I'm not as sure that we've got the same kind of need and market as the Blokes book, but it does tell men about options for them, fun things in their community, and that was supported by Red Cross to create that first edition. We're doing a second edition coming soon with the MSD funding. Another thing we're doing, last year that just passed, 2016, we did a Men's Issues Summit, which was nice. We've got a large number of relationships that I have, but also Ken Clearwater has, and we pulled together a beautiful conference in Christchurch. We're doing another one come April, the 2017. So another interesting thing that's emerged out of the project is some research we've done. recently, in particular, we did one piece of research into male victims of domestic violence and their needs in the Canterbury context. Anybody working here will eventually be coming across this as an issue, and I hope that your experience will be something you carry forward and share with other people, because that story is very undertold. It means that men are excluded from services generally. It means we're not asking men for services, and we're not seeing it as well, especially social workers. So when you're seeing it here, I hope the penny drops for you, and then you start talking about it with other people, because men need that story told as well, so that when they see it, they'll recognize it in themselves, and hopefully, instead of a life of 10 or 20 years of living with an oppressive person, they'll actually get some care for themselves. That's pretty much it now. I'll be moving on in a little way. I'm just doing funding admin and projects. Carl's doing all the day-to-day work, so hopefully he and whoever else you're working with is able to share relevant history in the next stages with you. Thank you.